Hey, it's Patricia Murphy. It's Tuesday. This is Seattle Now. Big Grocery is pushing back against Seattle's $4 an hour pay hike for some workers. But the union that represents them says it'll keep pushing, too, to bring the pay bump to more cities. We'll talk about hazard pay with Seattle Times reporter David Gutman. But first, let's get you caught up. Mariners CEO Kevin Mather is out. He resigned on Monday, less than 24 hours after a video surfaced where he said all kinds of things you don't want to be on record saying about your players. The MLB Players Association says his comments were inappropriate, but give a transparent look into how club managers really think about their players. The team's chairman, John Stanton, will take over the job while the M's look for a permanent replacement. There's no progress to report on a return to in-person learning for Seattle public school students. The district already said it wouldn't meet its March 1st deadline. Yesterday, it told parents any possible return is pushed back for at least another week. Updates from the union and school officials yesterday point to disagreements over plans to keep teachers safe. Things appear to be pretty stuck. There's also no agreement over whether to bring in a mediator. And a Seattle woman got more than she bargained for when she bought a crochet kit from a thrift store in Greenwood. Sure, it had everything she needed to make some cute animal hats, but with a bonus brick of cocaine. No lie. Seattle police said the woman opened the box and found what turned out to be a kilo of cocaine wrapped up inside. She immediately called the cops. No word on how it got there, but you can bet someone was missing it. When the pandemic hit, nearly everyone ran for the grocery store. Sales and profits grew, but so did the risk for employees. Now, Seattle has said that workers at larger grocery chains get paid for that risk, an extra $4 an hour, and affected grocery stores have responded. TJ's is leaning in, while Kroger closed stores and laid off employees. Here to explain is David Gutman. He covers local politics for the Seattle Times. Hi, David.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So there was hazard pay for frontline workers for a while. That was back at the start of the pandemic, and then that pay went away. Now some cities are stepping in. Where did the idea of $4 an hour come from?
It came, I think, largely from the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, the union representing grocery workers, and they've pushed legislation like this in a bunch of cities along the West Coast, not just Seattle, although Seattle was the first big city to get it done. Long Beach, California, and Berkeley, California have passed similar legislation, and both San Francisco and LA are in the process.
So this doesn't apply to all grocery chains, like 7-Eleven isn't involved in this, right?
Correct. It does not apply to convenience stores, places like that. It applies to national or regional grocery chains in Seattle. So the store has to be greater than 10,000 square feet, and the company has to have more than 500 employees worldwide. It has to be a big store and a big company.
And the Grocery Industry Association, very unhappy with this.
Yeah, two groups that represent Washington grocers have sued the city of Seattle. There's two basic arguments. One, essentially that they're being unfairly singled out among other industries, and the other that they have collective bargaining agreements with the unions that they work with, and that this kind of unfairly infringes on those agreements.
And just for perspective here, what do grocery workers in this town generally make per hour without this extra money?
Well, I think it varies a lot. The minimum wage at a big grocery store in Seattle is about $16 an hour. I think you could assume that a lot of, new grocery workers who just hired are making somewhere around that. On the other hand, grocery workers who have been there a while and are in a unionized job are making, significantly more than that, perhaps double, maybe even more.
And I'm curious if these hazard pay laws say anything about safety measures or working conditions, or are we really just paying people because we can't mitigate the risks of interacting with the public at this point?
No, they don't require anything. There's no mandate about safety or precautions. And a lot of the grocery stores and grocery companies will tell you, look, we've spent a lot of money on adding staff to sanitize things, on plexiglass dividers, on things like that. But no, this law, certainly here in Seattle, and I think the other ones are about well, these grocery workers are putting themselves at risk when a lot of us are working from home, and they should be paid for it.
Yeah, and a lot of that argument from the stores is part of the pushback. We are doing enough. The profit margins are very slim here for us. Some of the chains have really balked at this bump in pay. Kroger supermarkets decided to close 2 stores, and they blamed it directly on this move here in Seattle. And I think something like 100 employees are going to lose their jobs now between those 2 stores. Does the claim check out that grocery chains cannot afford this money?
That's a good question. I think in the case of those 2 QFC stores, the claim is at minimum highly disputed. The mayor of Seattle, Jenny Durkin, when that happened, came out and said, at least one of those 2 stores was already scheduled to close. The union, the UFCW, will say both of them were scheduled to close. I think even Kroger admits they were kind of underperforming stores. Whether this was, the straw that broke the camel's back or they were going to close regardless, I think is certainly up for debate. On the other hand, Trader Joe's saw, this law passed in Seattle, saw it passed in a couple California cities, and said, we're going to do this nationally for all our employees. We're going to give them all $4 an hour hazard pay for as long as the pandemic occurs. What we're going to do is cancel a regular mid-year raise that would have been permanent as opposed to a temporary raise, but much smaller. It would have been, I think, somewhere around 65 cents an hour.
So they're offsetting it just a bit by not giving that pay raise to employees.
Exactly.
Amanda Dalton is the head of the Northwest Grocery Association, which of course is fighting against this. And she says that stores aren't as risky as they're being made out to be.
Grocery stores are not at the center of this community spread, both in Seattle and really in Washington. So I think that's kind of why we question why we're being targeted.
What do we know about the risk inside stores?
Well, we know that grocery stores are indoor places where people continue to, if not congregate, at least come together in an indoor place. And other than specific scenarios, I think there's been so much COVID spreading around the country, it can be tough to pinpoint in many cases the exact cause of a specific infection or outbreak. So are grocery stores uniquely dangerous? No, I don't think so. I would imagine they're safer than, for instance, in-person dining, which you inherently have to take your mask off to do. Everyone, at least here in Seattle, in grocery stores is still masked up. On the other hand, schools in Seattle, public schools still remain closed. Movie theaters are closed. So there aren't that many big indoor public spaces where people still come together, and grocery stores are one of them.
The Department of Health says that the link to grocery stores is about 5% of non-healthcare COVID outbreaks. But I have to say, being inside a grocery store as a shopper feels like a very vulnerable experience. You just cannot control the people around you. And I would imagine if you're a grocery store worker who didn't sign up to work in a setting like this, that's a very, very tough place to be in right now.
Yeah, sure. And, not to play too much armchair epidemiologist, but it does feel a little uncomfortable sometimes when you're in a grocery store. And if you're shopping in a grocery store, you can at least try and, steer clear of other people and kind of walk the other way down the aisle or turn around or maneuver. If you're standing at a checkout, there's no maneuvering. The people come to you and they're right there. And yeah, certainly nobody signed up for this. And there are many of us who have been working from home.
I've seen it. I've seen it in the stores. I've seen grocery workers be confronted by unsafe situations that they have not felt comfortable addressing in the moment. David, in the end, someone is going to pay for this. Who's it going to be?
Well, that's a good question. I think the supporters of the bill would point to record profits among large grocers, places like Kroger and Target and Amazon, which owns Whole Foods. The grocery industry would counter with saying, we are bringing in, large amounts of gross revenue, but this is a very slim profit margin business. Profit margins are under 1%, and the money has to come from somewhere. So will we see prices rise? I'm not sure, when this law was originally being passed, the state grocery association said we'll see, grocers cutting down in kind of community work with food banks sponsoring, local nonprofits. I think that's a good question, and it remains to be seen.
We saw it a little bit with the $15 an hour minimum wage. Some restaurants raising their prices directly related to that law. So we will find out. The union is holding a press conference today about taking this idea to more cities. They're trying to capitalize on this momentum right now. Are we seeing the start of another $15 an hour minimum wage story where West Coast cities and unions team up for workers and try to rack up some wins and end up making national policy?
That's a good question. I think one big difference here, obviously, is that even in all the cities that have passed the law already, it's temporary. And for instance, in Seattle, this $4 pay raise will go away without the city council having to act again. As soon as, hopefully we are not in a civic emergency forever. And once that ends, once the mayor declares, that enough people have been vaccinated or we've reached herd immunity or whenever that happens, this will go away. But I don't know when that's going to happen. I don't think anybody quite does. So in the meantime, it does seem like there's a real possibility of this happening in more cities.
You heard it here first. David Gutman says the pandemic is going to end at some point.
If wishing made it so.
Right. David Gutman, Seattle Times politics reporter. Great to talk to you. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Seattle Now is produced by Jason Pagano, Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, and Clare McGrane. Matt Jorgensen does our music. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tomorrow.